Another announcement, given that this is the last class, there's going to be a new quarter starting on Wednesday for this upstairs class. We're going to be looking at the life or the book of James, and Dad's going to be leading that class. And if you didn't see when you walked in, there is some reading material that he's provided for a bit of an intro to the book. So please make sure you pick that up and take a look at that so that you're prepared for that discussion on Wednesday. We ended on Wednesday last week talking about the end of chapter 11 and the beginning of chapter 12, where we're talking about those who are young and remembering your Creator in the days of your youth. And I felt like we covered that subject fairly well. I think we had some good discussion there, mainly that it's important to enjoy the blessings of life and the blessings that come with youth, because youth is fleeting and youth is temporary. It's something that you're not going to have forever. And as soon as it's gone, you know it, and you won't get it back, is usually how that seems to go. Any other thoughts that came out of that idea before we go into, I was going to kind of skip over verse 1 of chapter 12, since we did cover that pretty well on Wednesday. But if there were any comments that people wanted to bring out, I'd be happy to discuss those. Yes, Joy?
So sorry about that.
No, don't apologize.
It just occurred to me after really looking at that again that if the verse says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, that implies that there is some teaching going on in the days of youth, which seems to put a lot of emphasis on either parents or Bible class teachers, but really get that information into them early in their youth to affect the rest of their lives. So it just seems to be so primary for it to be that teaching to happen in the youth.
Right. Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good point. If Solomon is the writer of Ecclesiastes and the writer of many of the Proverbs, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes both share a common theme of instruction to the young, don't they? And especially in the book of Proverbs, it's an admonition of a father telling his son, pay attention to the things that you're going to learn. Pay attention to this wisdom. Pay attention to the Lord and to understand the Lord's wisdom. That's an admonition to the young especially. I mean, that's a key and critical time to form in someone's life a faith in God. Not to indoctrinate a faith in God, but to build a faith in God. There's a difference between those two different things. A lot of children maybe are indoctrinated, but then when they're tested, they don't really have a true faith because it's just copycatting what they've been told. So good point. Other thoughts? I just found it interesting that in the end of chapter 11, when he says to not withhold things from yourself. He talks about don't withhold. He says, walk in the ways of your heart and walk in the sight of your eyes. That language mirrors what the preacher says in the beginning of this book. I didn't withhold anything from myself. Whatever my eyes saw that was good, I did it. Whatever my heart desired, I didn't withhold it from me. I think, maybe a good reminder here is that sometimes we read that, not withholding whatever I wanted or whatever my eye beheld. He's not talking about, I just went hog wild and I just lived in sin and debauchery. I think what he's saying is, I set out to see if enjoying life was all that there was and if that was enough. And the preacher's conclusion was, even though you can enjoy life, that's not enough. It's not enough all by itself. But here he tells the youth, that doesn't mean don't enjoy life. And that doesn't mean don't take advantage of your youth while you have it. See life as a blessing while you have it. And don't waste your youth. Okay. So what are some of the pictures then that start up in verse 2 through verse 5? This is a section that I've heard a lot of people talk about before, and I think there's a pretty common consensus on what he's dealing with here, especially because he's just talked about youth. What do we see here, first of all? If you had to put a title to this section of 4 verses, what would you title these verses? Go ahead.
It's kind of the end of life. It's people are getting older, lights are getting dim, the grinders are getting low. All of these things are through their normal course of usefulness.
Yes. So we're dealing with aging, and we're dealing with the cycle of life and the winding down of that strength and that vitality that exists in youth. And from the moment we're born Well, there's some discussion about this. We grow, once we're born, we grow, and then we reach a point where we've reached mature adulthood, and what starts to happen? You know, your brain cells don't replicate. I don't know, all the cells in your body replicate except your brain cells. Brain cells, you just lose them. And then all the rest of the cells in your body, they replicate, they're renewed every day. I think you get a new set of skin like every few months or something, or you get new bones every 7 years or something like that. But even the replication of cells, it gets worse every time. It gets a little worse every time. And so, you know, the skin is not the same skin that you had 20 years ago, and your bones aren't the same bones you had 20 years ago. They're still working, but, you know, things start to change. These pictures of the sun, the light of the sun and the moon and the stars being darkened, you know, the light is kind of going away. It's fading away. What about the picture of the clouds? They go away, and the clouds return after the rain. I think the ESV here says the clouds return after the rain. The NET, which is what I was mainly reading from, says the clouds disappear after the rain. So what's the idea of that? The idea of no clouds in the sky. I mean, sometimes clouds are seen as a bad thing, but I think when you want rain, when rain is the thing that brings life and moisture and rejuvenation, if there's no clouds in the sky, everything's going to dry up. It's arid. Arid is the word that I thought of. Life is killed in a situation where there's no moisture, where there's no water. What about those who keep watch over the house? They begin to tremble, and the virile men or the strong men, they begin to stoop over. And the grinders begin to cease because they grow few, and those who look through the windows grow dim. What are the pictures being used here? What do you think of those?
Just anything that has life, it's kind of giving us this picture that the life is going away, right? That it's all, you know, there's a time where it all just goes away.
Right.
It gets to the end of its lifetime.
So things are going away. Life is going away. I think so.
Andrew,
Yes.
I think it's interesting the use of the grinder, and I think a lot of us use the analogy of life's the grind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you think about erosion, and you think about a jagged rock that's in the water, and over time that rock becomes smooth, and that rock essentially yields to the constant pressure of the water. And you think about the strength of the rock compared to the fluidity of the water. How can water, in all its smoothness and all of its, you know, ability to take form, how can that actually eat away and destroy a hard rock? But it does. And I think that that's an interesting way to consider sort of the life's grind, and how it's just a gradual wearing down and erosion of the strength, but the strength of heart, and that the things that did not used to scare me when I was young scare me now, because I consider the consequences as being more grave because of my body's ability not to heal or not to bounce back from a fall. Or a tear in my skin never bothered me. Now I'll nurse a wound for a week because my skin is thinner and my blood is thin. And it just changes the way you look at taking on life. It's a grind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The loss of strength, you know, the people who watch over the house or the watchmen on the walls, they're soldiers, they're the defenders, and now they're afraid. So, you know, when we were in the prime of our strength, we could defend ourselves. We had confidence in our strength, and then we start becoming more defenseless. And that's not a shameful thing. It's a reality of life that, you know, as we grow weaker and older, you know, it's harder to protect ourselves on our own. We need defense and help. People prey on the old for that very reason, that they see them as defenseless. I've also heard, you know, a more literal view of this grinders as you start losing your teeth. You know, we have modern dentistry that helps us keep our teeth longer and more useful. In ancient times, when you got old, you pretty much lost your teeth. I mean, that was pretty much the option that you had. In the animal kingdom, one of the things that is one of the key limiters of an animal's lifespan is how long it can eat food. Literally, the loss of teeth and the loss of the use of teeth is what sets the lifespan of many animals. So that's another idea there of the grinders growing few. And I think to Dad's point about strength and fears, verse 5, they're afraid of heights and they're afraid of dangers in the streets. Things that maybe didn't bother you before that you become more wary of because you know how much more damaging they could be if you fell into misfortune or if you fell from a height. And then verse 4, the doors of the street are... Verse 4 was a little interesting. The doors along the street are shut, and when the sound of the grinding mills grows low, and one is awakened by the sound of a bird, and all their songs grow faint. I think the second part of that verse makes sense to me. The sounds, we can think of that as maybe loss of hearing, and also the idea of sleeplessness. You know, you wake up for apparently no reason, and you can't go back to sleep, and it's, you know, a bird can wake you, and then, you know, when you want to hear the birds, it seems like you can't hear as well as you used to before, and how frustrating that must be. This one, the doors along the street being shut, I looked at a few different translations to wonder what was meant by that one. And there was one, I think it was in the NIV, it said the doors to the street were shut. And so I thought, I put in my notes, maybe that's the idea of staying inside more. You know, the doors to the street, you don't go out, you know, the streets become dangerous for you, so you don't go outside. Or the doors being shut when the grinding mills cease, when the workday's over, all the doors are closed up, but you're still out in the street, maybe because slower moving, you don't get home, you know, no one's helping you get home, and you're out in the street after everybody's closed up shop, and so there's challenges there. So, okay, why these verses? Is growing old just so terrible, and Ecclesiastes is wanting us to just feel horrible about it? What do you think is the lesson that is to be gained here?
I think it's just the understanding that it's going to happen.
Right.
You just have to know that, you said earlier, you know, it's not shameful to get weaker when you get older.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he's just reminding us that this is just part of life. It's just going to be something that happens. And be prepared for it.
Yeah. I think a recurring theme in Ecclesiastes has been an awareness of the reality of life, the reality of how time progresses. Being aware of mortality is something that can benefit you in your life. It can change the way you live your life so that you live your life in a pointed and directed kind of way, if you're aware of that mortality. Did you have a comment, Dad?
The point of the comparison is so that as we age and as we do become weaker and more feeble, it's what are you going to replace that with? What's your strength going to be? Are you just going to give up on life? Are you just going to resign yourself to that you can't do the things you used to do? Or are you going to find other ways to gather strength, other ways to have vitality and renewal? And that's only going to be in the Lord. If you didn't establish that at a young age, you're generally not going to turn to that as you get older if your own strength and vitality has been the source of your motivation and the source of your confidence. But if the source of your confidence from the beginning has been the Lord, it's going to be a lot easier to pivot to those things and say, but through my weakness, God can provide for me opportunities. Through my lack of stamina, God's going to find ways to compensate for me.
Yeah, I think it's a warning. Whether he's still speaking to the youth or not, the warning is don't think that this isn't going to be a reality for you. Don't think that you're going to escape this. The fool is going to run from death and think, I'm never going to get weak. I'm never going to grow old. You know, I'm just going to fight it my entire life. And I don't think the preacher here is telling us to fight it, but saying, are you going to let yourself despise life, even though all these things change? If we're thinking about life merely under the sun, he says at the end of verse 8, it's futile. All these things are futile. This is ridiculous. You know, we live and we're strong, and then we get weak and we die. And it's ridiculous. What's the point? Maybe if we're only looking at under the sun. But if we have a mind of wisdom that's looking forward and looking beyond just life under the sun, there's no need to despise life as we age. Like Dad said, there are things that we can replace and change what we value. Maybe before we valued our vitality and our strength and our activity, but we can replace those things with other things that give our life just as much value and just as much purpose. You know, another thing to remember too, maybe another lesson from these verses, is that, at least from my perspective, you know, when you're a kid, there's some people you know who have always been old. You know, you've always known them as an older person. And you can't ever imagine that they were young. I remember going to the funeral service, I think it was for Pat Ragsdale, and there was old home video footage that they had playing at her service. I don't know if it was one of those old hand crank ones or what. It was from like the earlier mid-50s maybe. I mean, a time when it was pretty rare to have a video camera, I think. And you saw Lee and Pat Ragsdale in this footage, and Lee's wearing a white T-shirt and Pat's wearing a sundress. They look like magazine models. And I was watching that video and thinking, I cannot believe that is Lee and Pat Ragsdale, and they look like they belong on the cover of a magazine. I mean, they were playing out in the yard and picnicking with one of their children who was a baby, and I just thought, wow, that is really something. You know, I never had that perspective. I never saw them like that. But we ought to not forget, you know, everyone we know who's in a different stage in life, they were once like you. They were once, you know, bright and strong, and so don't look down on anybody because, you know, they were once in their prime as well. And also a reminder that you're going to get there, and what are you going to do with your life so that you're not stuck just looking back and stuck just reminiscing and longing for what came before. I don't think these verses are meant to make us afraid or make us dread the passage of time at all. Any other thoughts there? Go ahead, Jim.
Verses like this increases my faith in the Bible. Solomon was so right. Just look at nature, look at yourself, and look at human family. It's exactly what he said. Like a tree in the spring, it blooms out, it's beautiful. And in the fall, the leaves fall off. Man's hair is beautiful color. Have plenty of it in youth. As he gets older, it turns gray, it falls off, and he winds up with a heavenly head. You know what I mean by that, a heavenly head? Ain't no part in there.
Right. Good thoughts. Any other comments there? Okay. Starting in verse 9, he says, not only was now here we kind of see a change. I think the narrator has changed. This isn't the preacher's writings anymore. This seems to be a narrator who's talking about the preacher. So maybe this is an addendum to the book that's been written. I don't know exactly. But it says not only was the teacher wise, but he also taught knowledge to the people. He carefully evaluated and arranged many proverbs. The teacher sought to find delightful words and to write accurately truthful sayings. The words of the sages are like prods, some translations say goads, and the collected sayings are like firmly fixed nails. They are given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. There is no end to the making of many books, and much study is exhausting to the body. What do we think here? Bryce asks us the question, first of all, how are the words of these proverbs and these sayings, how are they like goads and how are they like nails? The two pictures that Ecclesiastes uses here. First of all, what are goads or prods?
It's a sharp stick.
Right, something to keep animals in line, a sharp stick, okay? It's something you poke. You prod. I mean, prod is a verb in our language. You literally prod the animal, you poke it, and you direct through the use of discomfort to guide where you want things to go. So how are these proverbs acting as prods? How are they acting as goads?
They would teach us to follow and to be guided by the Word of God.
Okay.
And they would spur us into action.
Yes, I like that. And spur is another word in our language that's a verb, but also a noun, the spurs on a cowboy's boot, poke the horse and get it to go. So I think Margaret's right that, these proverbs, they goad us into action, they educate us and they train us. And sometimes proverbs can poke us and actually hurt us a little bit, don't they? Do you ever see in these proverbs a lesson where you think, wow, I don't really think that way, or I haven't really been doing that. I haven't really been having that perspective on life. And here in Ecclesiastes, the preacher's saying something that I can see a lot of sense in, but I've kind of been ignoring. I think that's what's spoken of here. What about nails? What do nails do as far as proverbs? What's the point of that? I mean, you could hurt yourself with a nail, but I don't think that's the point in verse 11. They're like firmly fixed nails. Nails hold things together.
Place.
They keep them in place. So there's stability if something is nailed down. There's reliability if something is firmly fixed with nails. I think that's an idea carried here. I don't know why. I fixated on the word axiom. And if you're writing out mathematical proofs, you base it on axioms. And axioms are little pieces of truth that are just fundamentally true. 0 equals 0, 1 equals 1. Parallel lines never touch. These things are just axioms. They're always true. And you use those to build bigger and bigger ideas. And if they're built on these fundamental, elemental truths, then you can build out a larger structure. You can build out more complex ideas if you understand some of these basic truths.
Andrew, I think it's interesting. And look at this chapter. It starts with a warning, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And it talks about getting older and how it's not going to be great. Then it talks about the words of the wise are like goads and like nails.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at that, I don't know how many times as we get older in life, we look back at some of the instructions we've been given by those that are older. And we may not see the value in a statement, but we understand it later on, and it makes a whole lot more sense. That there's a lot of wisdom in the little short instructions and sayings that you can get from people that are older, wiser, been there, done that, and can help you understand what you don't know until you experience it.
Yeah, that's a good point that I hadn't really considered. First they're goads, and then they're nails. Maybe the first time you hear that teaching, it's like a goad. It's something you want to fight against, like as Jesus would say to Saul, why do you kick against the goads? But then later on, they're the things that we really build onto and hold onto, like nails. They hold things together. And nails can be pulled out. If something is nailed incorrectly or nailed in a way that's not helpful to the project, you can pull nails out and you can do it over and put nails back somewhere else. So, these things can be learned and worked over time. You're not fixed in your ways 100% forever if you've learned something incorrectly. So how about this idea of the books and the studying being exhausting? There's no end to the making of many books, and much study is exhausting to the body. Let's see, I'll read from the King James and see how that one reads as well. It's verse 12. My son, be admonished, of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness to the flesh. So, is Ecclesiastes just telling us, get your nose out of the books and be incurious? Is that the lesson to take home here? Go ahead, Jim.
That was another truth you really understand if you know much Bible study. Much study is a weariness to the flesh. Men, through the Bible came through, they got it by inspiration. We get it by perspiration.
Okay. So Jim makes a point that there is a measure of weariness that's required in study. I think we would say there's a share of study, there's a quantity of study that is profitable and is, I would argue, even necessary. But he says here, take heed, be careful, don't do too much. He says in verse 12, basically he's saying don't do, let me read it. After he talks about the words of the wise, the words of the sages, be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. There's no end in the making of many books, and much study is exhausting to the body.
But if all you do is study and learn and you never practice it, then it would be not only wearisome but useless.
Yes.
And
So
if you don't share what you've learned, then it hasn't had its proper purpose.
yeah, Margaret makes a good point.
I think it goes back to your earlier point and Aaron's point about how the goads become nails. So that which is first a prod or a prick to your thinking becomes fixed in your mind, and it becomes fixed in the structure of your heart and of your life. As you said, you can still reorder those, but once you have those fundamental truths, you don't have to spend the rest of your life looking for every other philosophical approach in order to arrive at truth. Now, you have to be open-minded that you examine the truth that you hold fast. And there are other texts that may stimulate you to do that. But it is unnecessary to know all that can be known
I've seen this take place before when someone is considering obeying the gospel, considering being baptized. And you might hear someone say, well, I don't feel like I know enough yet. I don't think I've studied enough yet. And maybe there's a place for that. Maybe there's a time for that. Or maybe, the necessity is to ask oneself, what are you hoping to learn that you do not already understand? If you know the need for grace and salvation, if you know the reality of God and the Son, it's okay if you can't write an essay on the intricacies of Revelation. It's okay if you can't quote the Scripture forward and backward or remember the key point of every one of Paul's epistles. That's not the criteria of being a Christian. So you can stalemate yourself by constantly trying to accumulate more, but never putting it into practice, like Margaret was saying. I just need to keep learning more and more and more, but I'm never doing. James talks a lot about that idea of, he talks about saying but not doing, or knowing but not doing. Did you have a point, Joy?
Yeah. I was really struck by the no end. So even if you do, or even if I do attempt, I will never have read it all. I will never have gotten it all. And if I wait, thinking I'm going to eventually, I wait to be baptized, or I wait to implement what I've learned, or I don't make good judgments about the things that I have read and learned, it's going to be futile because it's going to be endless. There's no end to that.
Yeah. Perfect is the enemy of complete. If we're always in the pursuit of perfect, you're never going to finish anything that you start. You're never going to find an end because you're always going to find something that's going to keep you from submitting that project or submitting. I did this all the time in school. I never wanted to rewrite a single essay that I wrote. So the first draft needed to be the final draft. And none of my teachers liked that. They all prompted me not to do that, and I couldn't understand why can't I just let the first draft be the only draft. I once read Mozart composed his symphonies front to back, no edits. He just wrote it and then it was done. I was like, why can't I just be like Mozart? And I don't know what happened to Mozart when he was a baby. Aaron.
I think it's interesting that back when this was written, it said there's no end to, there are many books, and there's no end to that. And this was back when books were hard to make.
Yeah.
Today, everybody and their brother has a book. And there's been studies that have said that the majority of books never get read. People write them and publish them, and that's not even talking about ebooks. I mean, you can produce an ebook in about 7 hours from just write something that's a few thousand words, and you can publish it really quick. And the library of books will never come to an end. And the warning Solomon gives with this is, hold on to the wise, because all this wisdom is given by one shepherd, our Lord and Savior. And all this other information, be very wary of it, because some of it is nonsense. And if you find yourself chasing, you're never going to find an end. And this is coming from somebody that listens to 2 to 3 audiobooks a month.
Right. I've had books dropped on my doorstep. Somebody's, going through the neighborhood, and here's a book on my doorstep, and it's like 2,000 pages, and it's supposed to tell me the whole meaning of life, and it has stuff about the planets and the stars aligning and all this stuff. It's like, people have time to write whatever they want. I don't know if Alexandria was the biggest library at the time when Solomon was alive. I don't know if it was that period of history or not, whether they overlapped. I'm sure Solomon had access to whatever the best library was. I'm sure he had access to it, or at least had knowledge of it. And you're right. Another thing I noted with this exhausting of study, you can always, if you keep looking, you will always find someone who will confirm whatever opinion you want to have confirmed. And with the internet, that's even more true than it ever was. You Google something, is cheese bad for you? And you read all these articles and you go, oh yeah, but I like cheese. And so then you Google, cheese is good for you. And here's all the people saying cheese is good for you. It's that easy. So you will always find stuff to try to confirm what you already want to believe. And so don't think that just the accumulating of books is going to be the answer to everything. That's not where it's found. Good thoughts there. I did want to take some time. We've got about 11 minutes left to kind of go through, because this is the last class. I want us to think about the entirety of Ecclesiastes. and think about some of the big lessons, some of the big picture items. And there was, well, I guess first, a good way to start that is to talk about verse 13 and 14 of chapter 12. Having heard everything, I reached this conclusion. Fear God and keep his commandments, because this is the whole duty of man. For God will evaluate every deed including every secret thing, whether good or evil. Why is this the conclusion of the book?
Because he's done everything he can to find out the meaning of life, and he's enjoyed his life, and he tells you to have an attitude towards life that is good in many ways, but also accept the bad things when they come your way, and that when it's all said and done with, the most important thing, and he says that, the most important thing is for you to fear God and keep his commandments. And this is the whole duty of man, and applies to everybody. And we might not want to think that way, but it does. And at the day of judgment, God will, he will ask us, or in some way we will be judged by him of what we have done and what we have not done. And don't find yourself wanting. I mean, you will, of course, but still yet, don't be the kind of person that will think things that are so important, and then later find out they're not that important. And that the most important thing is to fear God and keep his commandments.
Right. I agree, Audra. And, it's so important because I see a bit of a trend over the book of Ecclesiastes. It starts out and he's talking about physical things and some of the events that happen in life and stages of life, and he talks about the seasons and the times. There's a time for everything. He sort of waxes poetic about some of this stuff. The later chapters of Ecclesiastes really start to cause concern, don't they? Because he's talking about even the righteous don't get what they deserve. Even the righteous have misfortune, and the wicked prosper. So what's going on? So why does any of this matter? But I think there's hints, I think there's clues, because in the book of Ecclesiastes, he says that wisdom is like an inheritance, or some translations, wisdom comes with an inheritance. There is a forward expectation with wisdom. Wisdom looks beyond what's just going on right now and is able to see there's something more coming. And so why is this the conclusion of the whole matter? Because to fear God and keep his commandments, the fact that God will evaluate and judge everything, that's the only thing that lasts. That's the only thing that carries on past this life under the sun. So I think that's well put. Yes, Joy.
So 13 and 14 make me think of things like the synopsis or the nutshell of this book. And actually, it's the nutshell of the whole book, the whole Bible, because that's the bottom line. And I have missed looking at 14 because that's the explanation. God will bring everything you do into judgment. There are no secrets with him.
Mm-hmm.
He sees it all. So I think I've capitalized on part A and not B, but that's the reason. But A is that this is the bottom line of this whole book here, or the whole life, all of life.
Yeah. And some people may hear that God sees everything and react with fear or anger. Why is God so nosy? Or I don't like that God sees everything. But with wisdom comes, I think, a relief. God already knows, so you don't have to waste your energy trying to keep it a secret. You don't have to waste your energy trying to run from God, because he already sees. That part's already dealt with, so deal with the moving on. Deal with the repentance and the acknowledgement to God that you know that he knows everything. You know that he knows every deed, good or evil. Good thoughts.
I once knew a man, a preacher actually, who would that's kind of what Ecclesiastes does. I've said all that to say this.
Right. A good way to wrap up a sermon. You know, he's called the preacher, so this is definitely a lesson or collection of lessons. I saw Jim had a hand.
Yeah, he's talking about God knows everything. Brother John told us it was in the end before it was in the pen.
What was that again?
It's in the end before it's in the pen.
Before it's
God
in
knew
the pen.
beginning. So God knew it before the pen wrote it down.
In the beginning,
In the end with God before it was in the pen to us.
right? Before we ever have it recorded. I saw a hand, Audra, and then Zach.
I remember being in a graveyard, and you know, there are wonderful sayings on stones that are erected, and my sister and I were walking through this graveyard, and I remember the wonderful saying that there was apparently a young person that had died, and it was a girl, and the family was praising her and giving accolades. And my sister says to me, "Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that wonderful?" And I said, "Yes, yes, it is. But who knows whether those people that had that engraved on that stone are alive and would have you remember their daughter and you know, whatever." But I said the most important thing for each of us is to be, we know that we'll be remembered by God. And our loved ones, they'll pass away, and they can only say so much about us, but God will always remember us, and He will always care about us.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the one thing that sustains mankind, really, is to know that God cares and loves you and will always remember you. Always.
That's true. And even as Dad said, the stones themselves decay too. And things that we think are permanent, even if it's etched, I don't care if it's etched 10 inches deep in granite, it will go away. It will get covered up. It'll be forgotten. You know, it says that this fearing God is the duty of man. I think another way you could read that is that it is the purpose of man. This whole book has been about what is the purpose? What am I going to fill my life with? What am I going to do with my time? Because in the end, it all goes away. So what to do? And I think this book is a search for purpose. It's a search for meaning. And having a duty, having a responsibility, that gives a lot of people a sense of purpose. I think a lot of people they may mistakenly think that, well, I have a career, I have a job, I have responsibilities in my job. That's a responsibility, that's a duty. So that's my purpose. Your purpose is not your job. Your purpose is not your career. There's something far, far greater and longer lasting than that. Zach, you had a hand.
Yeah, with verse 14, what brings to my mind is, like you were mentioning earlier, Ecclesiastes talks about from beginning to end of life and all these things within life and in between, and the purpose and the times for everything. And what verse 14 shows me is Solomon's really trying to help us understand that through all those times and through everything in life, God is over that. He is somewhat in control of that, because He will bring every deed into judgment, every secret, everything. He's saying that God is over. He brings judgment to. So anything in our lives, God has a part. It's kind of what I see it as.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this fear God and keep Its commandments, it sounds like an admonition that an older person would say, maybe someone who's seen a lot.
Yeah.
But it's just as true for someone who's young. If this is the duty of young and the old, how much better life you'll be equipped for if that's the case. Jim.
Yeah, look at the overall Bible, it's like we said for years. It tells us where we came from, what we're doing here, and where we're going.
Right. We find the answers to those questions. And you won't find them from the books or from the libraries or from work or all those things. Dad?
I don't know if Audra even recognizes this, but her example, she lived it right out of the first chapter about remembrance of the things of the past. And there will come a time when there's no one that's going to remember me any longer.
Mm-hmm.
And the preacher could really get dark with that pretty easy if you think about it in terms of living life under the sun. And so he says wisdom, accomplishment, stature, monuments to your greatness. because no one's going to care. If that's what you're trying to do is create your legacy here, you are going to waste your time. If you're creating your legacy in the mind of God where he says, you are one of my children, then you have accomplished it.
Yeah. I wanted to get to the last question I'll throw it out in a few minutes before folks arrive. Any other just lessons or things that just really stuck out to you as we went through this whole book? I took the time, and I encourage you to do this too. If you have the notes from your class, or if you have the sheets, I went back through them, and I went to the very beginning, and I just scrolled through, and I highlighted anything that I had written down that just really stuck out to me, lessons to learn. Does anyone have one that they want to share, or anything that stuck out to them?
I heard a preacher say one time that life, live intentionally for eternity. And when you look at Ecclesiastes, that's what this whole thing is telling you. Don't get distracted by pleasure and greed and money and entertainment. Live intentionally, because at the end, God's going to bring everything into judgment. And if we don't live intentionally, it's going to be hard to accidentally get to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Success is not accidental. Success is intentional.
That's really a very good summary, because I think that takes so many of the lessons that the preacher gives. I mean, the fact that life is temporary and fleeting, vanity is the word that the preacher uses. But at the same time, you got to live life. You have to live the life when you're young. You've got to live and enjoy the work of your hands. So it's temporary nature, but also live life and live it intentionally. I think that's a good lesson, Aaron. Thank you. Well, we are out of time. Thanks for all the comments today. Thanks for the good discussion. And remember that we will be looking at James on Wednesday. Thank you all.